The violation notice came the same morning I burned my oatmeal and broke Mom's sugar bowl. Happy Tuesday. Name's Hal, 68, retired zoning clerk with a Ford pickup, a stiff back, and one porcelain rooster mug still standing. Funny how the smell of lemon polish and the sound of a neighbor's sigh can push a man past polite. Ever had a rulebook thrown at you just for sitting on your own porch? Hal Price opened his mailbox on a crisp October morning and found a letter that made his eyebrows twitch, a violation notice for unauthorized lighting. He stood for a moment under the soft hush of falling leaves, the kind that twirled like sleepy dancers before settling on the sidewalk. The air smelled of maple and distant chimney smoke. Ashford had always smelled like this in October, like memory. Hal folded the paper slowly, eyes scanning the fine print, and tucked it beneath his arm as he turned toward the porch. The warm orange string lights above the steps glowed faintly in the morning shade. They'd been up every October for nearly 20 years, ever since Lily passed. Not for Halloween. Not for decoration. Just for her. Hal had promised. He still remembered how she loved autumn best, how she said their porch looked like it belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting when the lights were on. Ellie was crouched by the steps with a box of replacement bulbs. Her chestnut hair was caught in a loose bun, and her sweater sleeves were pushed up like she meant business. I swapped the two flickering ones, she said brightly. Figured Grandma wouldn't like dim corners. He smiled, briefly. No, she wouldn't. She looked up, catching the paper tucked beneath his arm. What's that? Hal handed her the envelope without a word. Ellie unfolded it and read quickly, then again more slowly. Violation 4. Excess lighting. Grandpa, this is ridiculous. He stepped past her and lowered himself into his usual wicker chair with a soft groan. Rufus, ever loyal, curled up by his feet with a grunt of approval. They say it's unauthorized, Hal murmured. Didn't know you needed authorization for remembering your wife. Ellie's eyes darted to the lights, then to the notice. They want you to pay a retroactive fine. $200. What does that even mean? Means Karen's feeling bored, he said, taking a sip from his chipped Ohio State mug. The coffee was strong, unyielding. Just how he liked it. As if summoned, Karen Trillman walked by the front gate with her ever-yipping Pomeranian tucked in her arms like a velvet purse. Clipboard in hand, she stopped just long enough to smile, not kindly. Morning, Mr. Price, she said, sing-song. We noticed the lighting is excessive. Wouldn't want to attract unwanted attention, you know. Sometimes that kind of defiance invites escalation. Hal gave her nothing but a slow blink. Ellie bristled, rising from her crouch. They're porch lights, she said. You sent a warning for lights? Karen's smile didn't waver. We strive for community standards. Harmony. Especially before the holidays. Sure, Ellie muttered as Karen walked on. Rufus let out a soft growl as she passed. Back inside, Ellie paced. Why aren't you madder about this? They're fining you for honoring Grandma. Hal leaned back, his eyes distant. I'm just letting them write their own ending. She stopped pacing. What does that mean? He didn't answer. Just stood slowly and walked to the hall closet, pulling down an old composition notebook. The kind with the speckled black and white cover. He sat back at the kitchen table, dated the first page, October 20th. Then, in steady pen, wrote, Karen Trillman, Incident 1. Ellie watched, uncertain. Later that evening, after she'd gone to bed, Ellie scrolled on her phone and noticed something strange in the neighborhood Facebook group. 6 other homeowners, each over 60, each living alone, had posted photos of nearly identical violation notices. One for a garden flag. One for an overgrown hedge. One for wind chimes. Patterns emerged, cold and clear. Downstairs, Hal was already asleep in his recliner, a blanket over his knees, the notebook resting lightly on his chest. Rufus stirred and settled again. The porch lights glowed outside, casting warm halos on the darkened street. And in his notebook, one name stood alone, waiting. Karen might have had the clipboard, but Hal had a pen, and 3 decades of knowing how systems fall apart. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning chill when Hal pulled his old Ford pickup into the gravel lot beside Betty's Griddle Diner. The truck coughed to a stop, its engine wheezing like an old dog settling into sleep. Hal patted the dashboard twice and pocketed his keys. The diner's neon sign flickered in half-hearted welcome as the door jingled open. Inside, steam curled from mugs and maple syrup reigned supreme. A chalkboard by the counter cheerfully announced Meatloaf Thursday, even though it was Monday. The booth near the window, Hal's usual, was still open. He slid in and nodded to Marion, seated 2 tables over with a crossword and an untouched slice of cherry pie. Ellie arrived a few minutes later, bundled in a scarf and holding a thick folder. She slid in across from Hal, shaking the cold from her fingers. I printed everything the HOA website still has public. The bylaws are spotty. Some pages look like they've been removed. Hal raised an eyebrow. Deliberately? I mean, the page numbers jump. Article 5 skips straight to 7. There's no enforcement clause. And the file's timestamp was 2 months ago, right when Karen took over. Hal stirred his black coffee slowly. That woman is carving new rules into the town like a jack-o'-lantern. A few booths behind them, Stephanie Rollins sat in a half-whispered conversation with another woman from the HOA board, Tina, if Hal recalled right. Ellie tilted her head, catching snatches of their words under the jukebox's soft twang. Karen says the visuals are slipping, Stephanie was murmuring. She wants no holiday displays before November and no porch furniture after Thanksgiving. That's half the block, Tina replied, barely audible. People decorate earlier every year. Tell that to her. She already fined the Goldsteins for a fall wreath. Hal sipped his coffee. That's 3 just this week. Ellie glanced at him. 3? Mrs. Goldstein. Me. And Marion, he nodded toward the neighbor behind him. She got a warning for her porch plant stand. Seriously? That thing's been there forever. He gave a small, knowing smile. Exactly. Later, at the Ashford Library, Hal waited patiently at the public printer as it churned out faded copies of old HOA newsletters and property codes. He remembered the language well. Back in the 80s, when Ashford was just getting its feet under it, he'd served on the municipal committee that helped draft the original homeowner statutes. He knew what was supposed to be there. And what wasn't anymore. Ellie joined him at the table with her laptop open. I sent an email to the HOA inbox. Got an auto-reply that says, thank you for your concern. Your feedback has been logged. Logged, Hal muttered, straight into the trash. He tapped the corner of a bylaws page. But look here. Article 9. There used to be a clause, a resident quorum provision. They buried it under amendments, but it's still legally binding. Meaning? If I get 12 homeowners to sign a petition, I can force a formal HOA hearing. One that Karen has to attend. Publicly. Ellie sat back. 12. He pulled a worn notepad from his coat pocket and began to list names. The Petersons. The Langs, Mrs. O'Hare. Most of these people have lived here 20, 30 years. They remember what the neighborhood was before Karen and her lapdog board. She looked down at the growing list. This is becoming real, isn't it? Hal didn't answer. He just kept writing. That afternoon, he filed an official request for HOA meeting minutes and fine records under Ohio's Residential Transparency Clause. It would take a few days to process, but it was a first step, a signal flare. He left the small municipal office, tugging his jacket tighter as the wind picked up. Driving back, he turned onto Sycamore Lane, where the golden retriever wind chime on Marion's porch tinkled in quiet defiance. His own house came into view. And there she was. Karen Trillman stood across the street, dressed in her signature beige cardigan, a small leather notebook in her hands. She wasn't holding the clipboard today. This was something else. Something more private. Her eyes locked onto Hal's porch lights, still glowing faintly under the midday shadow. She wrote something in the book, slowly. Then she looked up. And smiled. Karen might have had the clipboard, but Hal had a pen, and 3 decades of knowing how systems fall apart. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning chill when Hal pulled his old Ford pickup into the gravel lot beside Betty's Griddle Diner. The truck coughed to a stop, its engine wheezing like an old dog settling into sleep. Hal patted the dashboard twice and pocketed his keys. The diner's neon sign flickered in half-hearted welcome as the door jingled open. Inside, steam curled from mugs and maple syrup reigned supreme. A chalkboard by the counter cheerfully announced Meatloaf Thursday, even though it was Monday. The booth near the window, Hal's usual, was still open. He slid in and nodded to Marion, seated 2 tables over with a crossword and an untouched slice of cherry pie. Ellie arrived a few minutes later, bundled in a scarf and holding a thick folder. She slid in across from Hal, shaking the cold from her fingers. I printed everything the HOA website still has public. The bylaws are spotty. Some pages look like they've been removed. Hal raised an eyebrow. Deliberately? I mean, the page numbers jump. Article 5 skips straight to 7. There's no enforcement clause. And the file's timestamp was 2 months ago, right when Karen took over. Hal stirred his black coffee slowly. That woman is carving new rules into the town like a jack-o'-lantern. A few booths behind them, Stephanie Rollins sat in a half-whispered conversation with another woman from the HOA board, Tina, if Hal recalled right. Ellie tilted her head, catching snatches of their words under the jukebox's soft twang. Karen says the visuals are slipping, Stephanie was murmuring. She wants no holiday displays before November and no porch furniture after Thanksgiving. That's half the block, Tina replied, barely audible. People decorate earlier every year. Tell that to her. She already fined the Goldsteins for a fall wreath. Hal sipped his coffee. That's 3 just this week. Ellie glanced at him. 3? Mrs. Goldstein. Me. And Marion, he nodded toward the neighbor behind him. She got a warning for her porch plant stand. Seriously? That thing's been there forever. He gave a small, knowing smile. Exactly. Later, at the Ashford Library, Hal waited patiently at the public printer as it churned out faded copies of old HOA newsletters and property codes. He remembered the language well. Back in the 80s, when Ashford was just getting its feet under it, he'd served on the municipal committee that helped draft the original homeowner statutes. He knew what was supposed to be there. And what wasn't anymore. Ellie joined him at the table with her laptop open. I sent an email to the HOA inbox. Got an auto-reply that says, thank you for your concern. Your feedback has been logged. Logged, Hal muttered, straight into the trash. He tapped the corner of a bylaws page. But look here. Article 9. There used to be a clause, a resident quorum provision. They buried it under amendments, but it's still legally binding. Meaning? If I get 12 homeowners to sign a petition, I can force a formal HOA hearing. One that Karen has to attend. Publicly. Ellie sat back. 12. He pulled a worn notepad from his coat pocket and began to list names. The Petersons. The Langs, Mrs. O'Hare. Most of these people have lived here 20, 30 years. They remember what the neighborhood was before Karen and her lapdog board. She looked down at the growing list. This is becoming real, isn't it? Hal didn't answer. He just kept writing. That afternoon, he filed an official request for HOA meeting minutes and fine records under Ohio's Residential Transparency Clause. It would take a few days to process, but it was a first step, a signal flare. He left the small municipal office, tugging his jacket tighter as the wind picked up. Driving back, he turned onto Sycamore Lane, where the golden retriever wind chime on Marion's porch tinkled in quiet defiance. His own house came into view. And there she was. Karen Trillman stood across the street, dressed in her signature beige cardigan, a small leather notebook in her hands. She wasn't holding the clipboard today. This was something else. Something more private. Her eyes locked onto Hal's porch lights, still glowing faintly under the midday shadow. She wrote something in the book, slowly. Then she looked up. And smiled. A 3-ring binder sat on Hal's kitchen table, labeled in neat Sharpie, HOA case, October and November. Ellie had never seen her grandfather work like this. The binder was flanked by yellow legal pads, each line filled with Hal's precise, all-capital handwriting, and an old manila folder with fading corners. He'd lit a cinnamon apple candle, its scent mixing with the sharpness of fresh printer ink. Ellie poured 2 mugs of coffee and slid into the seat across from him. "Assistant archivist reporting for duty," she said, trying to mask her nerves. Hal glanced up with a half-smile. "Ready to find out how deep this rabbit hole goes?" Over the next hour, the kitchen filled with soft rustles of paper, clicks of binder rings, and the low hum of Ellie's laptop. Hal laid out fine notices from their neighbors, each one dated, copied, and flagged. Names were written on index cards and stacked like dominoes. Ellie noticed a pattern within minutes. "They're all over 60, she murmured. "And not one of them's remodeled anything since 2010. "That's not a coincidence," Hal said. He circled a date in red ink. "Karen's been issuing fines every 3rd week, after board meetings." Ellie tapped away at her laptop. "I think I found something." HOA funds went to a company called Evergreen Visual Services. $6,000 for holiday ambience consultation. She arched a brow. "In July." Hal grunted. "Bet they consult real hard." Outside, the maple trees dropped amber leaves like tired secrets. Inside, the atmosphere grew taut with purpose. They gathered testimonials from neighbors. Marion had kept her flag up year-round until a citation demanded removal due to weathered appearance. Hal scribbled that down with tight lips. Then there was Charles, the Vietnam vet who'd gotten a fine for excessive bumper stickers, all of which were American flags. Ellie reached out to Ms. Lillian, a retired teacher who'd been fined 4 non-compliant wind chimes. She laughed softly through the phone, saying, "Tell Hal I always knew he'd fight back someday. Just not with a printer." By the afternoon, Hal had 3 thick folders labeled "For Public Record." Each contained their complaint, appendices of testimonies, copies of violation notices, and a summary report Ellie had written with impressive clarity. She printed the cover letter twice. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked, chewing her bottom lip. "It's not about what happens first," Hal said. "It's about setting the right record. Truth outlives petty." The following morning, they drove together to the Ashford post office. The clerk, a stout man with a scarlet bow tie, recognized Hal and nodded. "Certified mail?" he asked, weighing the envelope with care. "To the State Oversight Board," Hal replied, sliding cash across the counter. "You want return receipt?" Hal gave a grim smile. "Absolutely." As they left, Ellie noticed her grandfather's gait was slower but steady. He looked like someone who'd found the rhythm of a long game. That evening, after Hal had retreated to his chair with the dog curled at his feet, Ellie began reviewing HOA response timelines. The candle on the kitchen counter burned lower. Everything felt briefly calm. Until a knock at the door shattered it. Hal shuffled over, expecting a package. But there was only a slip of paper taped under the porch light. He peeled it off, squinting at the print. "Unauthorized occupancy, HOA fine, $500. Ellie stood in the middle of the town's weekly flea market, clipboard in hand, as neighbors avoided her eyes like she was selling timeshares. The air was heavy with cinnamon, roasted nuts, and hay from the pumpkin stall nearby. Autumn sunlight dappled through the canopies of orange and gold above the square, but Ellie felt like she was casting a shadow no one wanted to step into. Every time she made eye contact, a resident looked away, suddenly fascinated by jam jars or homemade candles. "Hey, Ruth. Got a second?" she called out. Ruth Ackerman, a longtime neighbor who'd once taught Ellie how to play hopscotch, mumbled something about needing to check her potpourri and ducked behind a display of hand-knit scarves. Ellie sighed. The clipboard was heavier than it should have been, maybe from the weight of second-guessing. From the bench beneath the cider tent, Hal watched her patiently, Rufus lying at his feet. He nursed a paper cup of warm apple cider and didn't interfere. This was Ellie's trial by fire. After another failed attempt, Ellie trudged back over, dropping beside him. "I feel like a Jehovah's Witness selling lawsuits," she muttered. "You're just asking folks to remember what the neighborhood used to be," Hal said gently. "But people are scared." HOA Powers groaned sharp. "Yeah, well, they sharpened it on us." He chuckled. "Try softer. Talk to folks like you're just visiting. Make it personal." She nodded and stood again, this time pocketing the clipboard and carrying only her smile. The flea market crowd moved slowly, wrapped in scarves and conversation. A local guitarist strummed old James Taylor songs by the gazebo. Ellie strolled casually, stopping to admire gourd art and hand-painted mailboxes. She found Marion at a folding table selling spiced apple hand pies and wool gloves. Marion grinned, handing her a warm pie wrapped in wax paper. "I got 4 names for you already," she said, tapping a sticky note tucked inside her cash box. "People trust my baking more than your clipboard." Ellie blinked, grateful. "You're a miracle. Just a woman with good pastry and a better memory." By early afternoon, Ellie had coaxed 5 more signatures, some with quiet nods, others with whispers and shared sighs. One man wrote with trembling hands. "Don't tell Karen. She's not just scary. She's watching." That warning echoed minutes later. Stephanie appeared near the kettle corn booth, looking nervous in a cranberry-colored coat. "Ellie," she said in a hushed voice, "I shouldn't be talking to you." "Then why are you?" Stephanie checked behind her. Karen had the HOA email server wiped last week. Everything's gone, records, warnings, complaints. Ellie's mouth went dry. "That's illegal." "Prove it." "She'll say it was a server crash." As Stephanie turned to go, Ellie noticed Tina standing nearby, pretending to peruse jars of fig butter, but her eyes flicked toward them, tracking every word. Back at the porch that evening, Hal had cleared a shoebox and was lining it with index cards and signature sheets. A faded fishing license from 1978 rested beneath the stack like a forgotten talisman. Ellie dropped the last few names in with a satisfying snap of paper. "That's 13, she said. "More than enough," Hal replied. "We've bought ourselves a hearing." As the sun dipped and porch lights flicked on across the block, Ellie began sketching HOA caricatures in her notebook, Karen with devil horns, Tina with binoculars, Stephanie in a tug-of-war with a stack of bylaws. It helped her think. Hal brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her as the street quieted. "Proud of you," he said. She smiled. "You started this. You're the one putting up signs in enemy territory." Her laughter faded when she checked her phone. Karen just posted something. Hal squinted at her screen. It was a public post, neatly phrased. "Certain residents are attempting to disrupt the harmony of Ashford through procedural manipulation. We must remain vigilant. The HOA's purpose is unity, not division." Hal set his mug down slowly. Later that night, after Ellie had gone inside and Rufus had curled by the door, Hal stepped out for one last check of the porch lights. And there it was. A dead potted plant, wilted and brown, placed neatly on the top step. Taped to the side was a note written in delicate script. "Some things are better left to wilt." The HOA meeting room smelled like lemon disinfectant and stale coffee, but Hal noticed the new security camera blinking above the door. The blinking wasn't rhythmic, it pulsed like a warning. Hal adjusted the collar of his corduroy jacket and stepped inside, clipboard in hand. Ellie trailed behind, eyes darting to the glossy floors, the high windows, and the framed mission statement reading, "Ashford HOA, Preserving Excellence." Karen Trillman stood near the head of the oval table, her posture immaculate and her blouse as crisp as her smile wasn't. The room had filled, but there was a strange hush, like everyone was waiting for a curtain to drop. Hal placed the envelope on the table. 13 signatures. Verified. "We're requesting a formal hearing, as permitted under Section 4C of the HOA Charter." Karen didn't look at the envelope. Unfortunately, Mr. Price, those signatures were submitted after the quarterly deadline for hearing petitions. Hal's jaw shifted. We submitted them the moment we had quorum. But not within the calendar window. She motioned toward a man at the end of the table, HOA secretary, who nodded as if on cue. Ellie stepped forward. That's a technicality you just made up. Karen's voice dropped a note. Young lady, the HOA has rules. Perhaps you should review them more thoroughly before making accusations. At that, Stephanie avoided eye contact. Her pen scratched a line across a blank notepad. Marion, seated in the back, frowned openly but said nothing. Tina appeared from the side kitchen with a tray of styrofoam cups. She handed one to Hal with both hands and whispered, almost inaudibly, "Be careful. She's getting paranoid." He gave her a look that said, "I know." As the meeting limped into unrelated agenda items, holiday decor color schemes, mailbox repainting protocol, Hal and Ellie gathered their things and left quietly. Outside, the air was colder. Ellie blew into her hands. That was a stone wall in a pantsuit. At least we know where the cracks are, Hal replied. Later that evening, Betty's diner was nearly empty except for a few locals hunched over pie and black coffee. The football game played low on the radio, a hushed Ohio State announcer murmuring over clinking forks. At their booth, Marion passed Hal a yellow highlighter while Ellie pulled out the now dog-eared HOA charter. There's a loophole, Hal said, tapping the page. Section 7A, Emergency Hearings. If funds are legally questionable, the board must meet publicly within 7 days. Ellie raised her eyebrows. And we're getting close to questionable, right? We'll need the October ledger. And the November. Line by line. They huddled like strategists, cross-checking purchase orders, lawn care charges that doubled overnight, mysterious consulting fees for holiday aesthetics. A $500 payment marked only as seasonal spirit maintenance. Ellie snorted. What's that even mean? Did Santa invoice them? By the time the jukebox clicked off for the night, they had 3 pages of notes and a new plan. Hal pocketed the receipt from his coffee. On the back, he'd scribbled the names of 3 board members and a timeline. Back at home, Hal cleared the workbench in his garage and unrolled a paper map of the neighborhood. Pushpins marked red for fines, blue for warnings, yellow for anonymous complaints. It looked like a battlefield. Ellie sat nearby, plugging data into a spreadsheet. She muttered, "It's not just about lights anymore." The next morning, an HOA email blast announced a board-only budget review, scheduled immediately. No time for public questions. No invitation for petitioners. When Hal and Ellie walked to the clubhouse at the stated hour, they found the glass doors locked from the inside. Lights were on. Voices carried. Karen's laugh rang sharp and short, like a dropped plate. Rufus pawed at the ground beside Hal. "They're sealing the hatch," Ellie said, teeth clenched. Hal only nodded. "That's panic. Let her make her move." Later, as Ellie packed up her laptop, a new email pinged. No subject line. No signature. Just a Gmail address Ellie didn't recognize and a single sentence. "Meet me behind the community garden, after 8 p.m., T." Tina's hand trembled as she passed Ellie a thumb drive and whispered, "Don't tell anyone where you got this." They stood beside a wire bench in the community garden, the air cool and earthy with the scent of overturned soil and late-blooming mums. A string of fairy lights buzzed faintly overhead, most of them flickering like tired eyes. Tina's windbreaker was zipped up to her chin, and her eyes scanned the dark edges of the fence like she expected Karen to emerge from the shadows. Ellie pocketed the drive. "You sure about this?" Tina nodded, not meeting her eyes. "I used to think Karen was just particular. Now I know she's dangerous." Back at Hal's kitchen, the lights were low except for the lamp over the table, casting long shadows across the stacked binders and legal pads. Ellie inserted the thumb drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, then revealed a series of folders labeled with months and line items, landscaping_expense_September, holiday budget_2024, vendor correspondence_KT. Hal leaned over her shoulder, reading glasses perched on his nose. Open that one. Vendor correspondence. Inside were emails, dozens of them. Many from Karen's HOA address, signed with her usual flourish. But others were from personal accounts, linking invoices to unfamiliar companies: Trillman Property Services, KT Solutions, Seasonal Excellence LLC. The invoices all had one thing in common: they led to the same routing number. Ellie sat back in her chair. She's been paying herself. Tina's note had mentioned ghost vendors, but this was concrete. Karen had created fake businesses, billed the HOA for services never rendered, and quietly funneled the funds out. Hal stood and walked to the drawer beside the fridge, pulling out an old contact list. John Baylor. Retired city attorney. Owes me a favor. He stepped onto the porch to make the call. The orange light above the door glowed steadily as Rufus trotted out and lay down beside Hal's boots, his presence quiet and comforting. Inside, Ellie sifted through more files. Tina had included spreadsheets tracking every questionable transaction. Beside each row was a timestamp and, in one case, a note from Tina herself: tried to raise this in September, MTG, denied. When Hal returned, his face was unreadable, but his voice held purpose. John says it's enough for the state to open an audit. We'll need hard copies. Signed. Notarized. By late afternoon, Marion arrived with her portable scanner and a tin of lemon bars. She wore her Sunday coat and lipstick, explaining, "If I'm helping take down a tyrant, I'm dressing the part." They scanned everything. Ellie labeled each file twice. Marion signed where needed. It was quiet, precise work, the kind of work Hal liked. As dusk crept in, Ellie stepped out for air. The garden thrift shelf by the fence still had odds and ends: ceramic gnomes, sun-faded cookbooks, a chipped novelty mug. She spotted one that made her laugh and bought it for 50 cents. When she came back, she slid the mug toward Hal. It read, "World's Calmest Grandpa." For the first time since October began, Hal chuckled. Not a polite breath, not a dry hum, but a true, chest-deep laugh that warmed the room. He rinsed the mug, poured fresh coffee, and sat down to begin the formal brief for the audit. Just as he finished, a sharp knock came at the door. Ellie opened it. Taped to the porch post was a new notice. Unregistered animal, Rufus deemed security hazard. Removal in 48 hours. The porch light flickered once. Then again. By Sunday morning, Hal's kitchen table looked less like a breakfast nook and more like a crime analyst's war desk: sticky notes, highlighters, 3 mugs of cold coffee. The sunlight angled through the blinds, casting stripes across color-coded folders, and a yellow legal pad filled margin to margin. Hal leaned forward, adjusting his bifocals, then scratched a note beside a figure circled twice in red ink. Ellie sat across from him, tapping at her laptop, her brows furrowed as she matched spreadsheet entries to photocopied checks. Her ponytail had drooped sometime in the last hour, and her sweatshirt bore a faint smudge of printer ink. She didn't care. "This one," she murmured, highlighting a vendor name, Winterview Services, "doesn't exist in the state registry. It's just a P.O. box. Look at the dates, 4 payments, each within 24 hours of a board meeting." Hal nodded slowly, unhurried. She got sloppy. Arrogance does that to people. At 10:43 a.m., the screen of Hal's old landline phone lit up. The courthouse clerk confirmed receipt of their formal brief. Audit scheduling would be finalized within 72 hours. Hal reached for a 4th mug and poured lukewarm coffee, grimacing as he drank. "That's the roots watered," he muttered. "Now we wait for fruit." Meanwhile, Ellie and Tina had commandeered the hallway floor for their operation. Manila envelopes were arranged by fiscal year, each one labeled in Ellie's neat block letters. Tina, legs crossed and face intent, tapped her pen over a ledger. She approved duplicate payments for the same landscaping invoice. "This one's literally just a photocopy of the last, with the date changed." They paused for a moment, listening to the ticking wall clock and the distant bark of Rufus out front. "I'll testify," Tina said at last, soft but steady. "She can't scare me anymore." Stephanie arrived mid-afternoon, her eyes darting around like someone who knew they were being watched. She slipped in through the back door, holding a thumb drive. "I deleted what I could," she confessed. "But she made me. Said it was streamlining the archive. Told me the town wouldn't understand what real compliance meant." Ellie gently guided her toward a seat. "It's okay. Just tell us what you remember." Outside, mailboxes rattled as wind passed. Some carried more than bills that day. Neighbors found folded slips of paper signed only, "Concerned Neighbor." Hal read his aloud, "It's sad when people sow division for selfish reasons. The neighborhood sees everything." He tossed it onto the dining room table like a playing card. "Cowards talk with paper." That evening, Marion hosted the potluck in her living room. The space glowed with string lights and smelled of sage stuffing and cinnamon. Children laughed on the carpet while older residents traded casserole recipes. No one spoke of audits or bylaws until dessert. "Thank you," a man in a John Deere cap said to Hal as he handed him a slice of pecan pie. "For reminding us we're not just renters in our own lives." Hal smiled modestly, eyes drifting toward the window where the last light of day burned through oak leaves. Ellie scribbled names and addresses into her ledger, but paused to watch her grandfather. She hadn't seen that particular look, focused, firm, quietly hopeful, since her graduation. The next morning, Karen emerged with a folding table and plastic ballot box at the community mailbox gazebo. A sign flapped beside her, "Special vote, preserve our values." She waved as residents passed, voice honeyed, asking if they'd cast their vote to declare Hal hostile to HOA integrity. Most kept walking. One man, bald with suspenders, picked up a ballot, stared at it, then tore it in half and let the pieces fall. Karen's smile cracked. By late afternoon, Ellie sat on the steps of Hal's porch, the sun warming her back. Tina arrived quietly, holding a folder sealed with duct tape. "She forged these," she said. "That's her handwriting. Bank withdrawal slips. This ends tomorrow." Karen Trillman arrived at the courthouse in heels, pearls, and smug confidence, and left in zip-tied cuffs before the lunch bell rang. Reporters gathered like pigeons near the front steps, camera shutters stuttering in sync with murmurs. Karen clutched her briefcase like a shield, lips pressed into a politician's smile. She didn't glance at Hal or Ellie, seated quietly in the third row. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked on the judge's bench, as if staring down the gavel might delay its fall. The courtroom's buzz settled into silence as the bailiff called the hearing to order. Hal stood with steady posture, his papers stacked neatly, his voice low but clear. He walked through the records, the timeline, the fabricated vendors. Ellie handled the tech, projected emails, color-coded ledgers, witness signatures. Tina followed, voice shaking only slightly. She described internal pressure, deleted emails, threats masked as community loyalty. When asked why she came forward, she glanced toward Hal. "Because integrity doesn't expire," she said. Karen's defense unraveled within minutes. She leaned on platitudes, volunteerism, overwork, a few clerical errors. But the judge raised an eyebrow at a spa charge listed as winter sidewalk consultation. Stephanie confirmed her signature had been forged on at least 2 expense approvals. Then came the email trail, headers, timestamps, carbon copies to nowhere. Even the most sympathetic observers grew still. By 11:42 a.m., the gavel fell. Karen blinked twice. The bailiff approached. No one clapped. No one booed. Just a slow exhale, collective and final. The HOA was placed under state supervision pending election of a new board. Karen was escorted out, heels scraping tile, her pearls swinging slightly as if they too were embarrassed. Outside, Marion captured the moment on her phone. "Justice," she said into the camera, with pie on the side. That night, Marion's living room pulsed with warmth. Mismatched chairs surrounded a table groaning under roast turkey, stuffing, cranberry jars, and a banana pudding that disappeared faster than it cooled. Hal sat at the head, not because he asked to, but because no one else would dare. He wore his cleanest flannel shirt. Rufus napped beneath him, a turkey-colored bandana tied around his neck. The town hadn't held Thanksgiving like this in years. Pastor Lewis led a simple prayer. Tina brought extra cider. Stephanie arrived last, pie dish in hand, and when she handed Hal a slice, he simply nodded, as if peace didn't need words. Ellie rose partway through dessert, glass lifted high. To Grandpa Hal, she said, grinning, who proved you don't have to shout to be heard. Laughter bubbled up. Hal raised his glass back. But it helps, he added, to have a good notary and a stubborn granddaughter. As the room chuckled, What a Wonderful World played faintly on Marion's old stereo. The smell of cinnamon and cornbread mixed with the rustle of leaves against the window. No one asked where Karen would be spending Thanksgiving. No one mentioned hearings or fraud or fines. They'd already moved on. And no one, not even Rufus, was moved from his place under Hal's chair.